If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what is the scariest, creepiest thing you've witnessed in your life? A white figure walking slowly towards me. Unfortunately, I had fallen asleep while reading and left my lamp on. My mother had woken up to use the bathroom in the night and noticed the light from the hallway, so she came into my room to turn it off. In her white dressing gown. I am incredibly short-sighted, so without my glasses on, I woke up when she came in the room and saw the blurry white coming towards me. We both screamed so loudly that we woke the rest of the family up. After that, she promised never to turn the lamp off again if I promised to contribute to the electricity bill if I left the light on all night. It seemed better than another heart attack. When I was about 14, my good friends and I were all out riding our four-wheelers, ATVs, whatever works. I live in the country, miles away from any town or city. It's very rural. Anyway, there were probably 6 of us, my sister and 4 of our friends. We had been riding all day, and we were headed back to my house when we decided to take a different trail. My guy friend was at the front of the line and stopped to get a log out of the way from the trail. We were in a field with lots of holes that were covered by the tall grass, so we tried not to venture off the trail so we wouldn't damage our four-wheelers. As he is picking up this huge log from the trail, I look over to the tree line at the edge of the field, which was about 15 feet or so away from me, and there is a guy in one of those scream masks that has fake blood in the plastic of it. And he's coming right for us. I started screaming for them to go. They all turned and saw him, and we hurried out of there. Before we got out of there, he was within a few feet of the back of my four-wheeler. It was one of the scariest things to ever happen to me at the time. I didn't really ride much after that. When my friends and I were younger, like in our late teens, we would go into all those abandoned buildings in the middle of the night with minimal light or anything. We went into this kid's hospital once, we had been in it several times before, and our one friend is ducking around, as he always did. Well, my other friend is bugging out because she hears something. I heard it too, but I downplayed it, and then I was like, dude, it's probably Tim. Well, Tim was actually behind us the whole time. Then we hear the noise louder and closer, and it's a little girl going la la la. The location of the singing was in front of a children's mural with names on it. Tim's eyes almost fall out of his head, and he books it. I take off after, and my friend is struggling to keep up, nearly in tears, lol. We made it out of the building and never went back again. Shortly after, the hospital was knocked down to make room for townhouses. Just to confirm, it definitely wasn't a real person playing a joke on us. The entire floor is cracked up, so if you're walking in there, you'll hear floor tiles cracking the entire time. Out of all the dipshit stuff I've done, that was the most legit paranormal experience. So I used to camp out by myself up at Joshua Tree National Monument in California quite often. And there was this one spot where I always went. It was up in the mountains a little bit. It was about a 45-minute hike from down in the desert where I had to park my car. I have camped out there by myself dozens of times. That night, about 2:30 in the morning, I was sitting around the campfire playing the guitar and smoking a joint. Wasn't drunk. I hadn't smoked any more than I usually do. All of a sudden, I got a really creepy feeling. Like I was being watched. I couldn't shake it off. I never felt like that up there. I don't get creeped out when I'm camping. But for some reason that night, I did. And I couldn't shake it off. Finally, I couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. So I put down the guitar and started creeping around, trying to see if I could maybe spot someone watching me. I had my binoculars with me, and it was a full moon, so I could see rather far. I kept hiding in different spots, trying to see if I could see someone, but I couldn't. And then I started thinking, what if it was a mountain lion or something? But I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. None of that, but it felt like something was out there with me. That was the only way I could describe the feeling I had. I got so freaked out that I packed up my SHT in the middle of the night and hiked the 45 minutes back down to my car. By the time I got to my car, I was feeling completely different. It was a beautiful night. I was in my favorite place in the world again. And I felt stupid. So rather than drive an hour and a half home, I decided to go back up to the camping spot and stay the night. I wasn't thinking anything weird at all. Because the strange feeling was completely gone. But by the time I got halfway back up the mountain, the feeling came back way worse than before. Needless to say, I turned around and drove back home. It's not the scariest story, I know. But to me, it was terrifying. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. But I felt something. Something really bad was out there with me that night. I don't know if it wanted to hurt me or just wanted me to leave. After a couple of weeks, My pride got the best of me, so I went out there and camped out for one night by myself again. Nothing happened, but it just wasn't the same anymore. It totally ruined the feeling I used to get anytime I visited the park. I haven't been there in a few years, so I'm hoping the next time I go, which will be during the day, things will feel different. At the time of the sleepover, it was me and my best friend, both 7 or 8. We are both now 16 and 17 and haven't talked about this incident since. We lived in Florida, about 15 minutes away from Tampa. It was one of our many sleepovers, and it was no different from others. We played with Barbies, watched movies, and read books until we couldn't take it anymore and went to bed around 9 or 10. I turned off the lights and climbed up to my top bunk, where both I and my friend were going to sleep. As I lay down, something immediately didn't feel right. The house I lived in was relatively old, and our landlord sucked and never came to fix anything. Let alone, did he only care when our rent was due? Before getting in bed, I flipped on my fan and had my mom turn the AC down. But as I got into bed, my fan was turned off, as was the AC. But I thought the power went out, and I didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes go by, and I can't sleep, and I feel like I'm dying of heat stroke. I'm not sure if my friend is awake, so I say her name quietly. She responds immediately, saying, "I can't sleep." But it's not because it's hot. I look over and can barely see her silhouette. I look up at the ceiling, sigh, and say, "What is it then?" She responds, saying it's the man in the corner. When I say I got chills, I got chills. I look over at her slowly and turn my head to look at the corner. I thought she was lying because I didn't see anything. I let out a breath of air I didn't know I was holding in. I go to adjust my blanket, and that's when I see him. A man, dark and tall, seemed to stare at both of us. I immediately gripped my friend's hand and closed my eyes hard. "We have to get my mom," I whispered, and I felt my friend nod. But we both lay there, unable to move. All of a sudden, I feel the movement of someone climbing up the ladder and crawling slowly. The blankets moved with the movement, and I slowly opened my eyes to watch the man slowly start to crawl towards us. I was gasping for air and looked over to see my friend watching, paralyzed from moving. I look back at the man and can only see his outline, no features. I hold my friend's hand tight and say, "Scream when I tap your finger." I barely get out a whisper. She slowly nodded, and as I watched the man slowly reach for my face, I tapped her hand, and we both screamed bloody murder. My mom came running in no later than 20 seconds later and turned on the light, and both me and my friend were holding each other and crying. There was no trace of the man, and my mom checked all the doors, saying they were locked and hadn't even been touched. We both slept on the couch that night, watching Barbie movies and holding each other tightly. To this day, I don't know what or who it was, but I will always remember the eerie feeling of death being close to my face. I just moved to a new town alone, me and my dog. I went hiking early one morning on an old rail trail and met a fellow dog walker who told me there is a large group of them, other dog walkers, who meet up in a field each morning to let the dogs play. He invited me to join, and I agreed, following him off the path. I was excited to meet new people and have a community. After walking deeper and deeper into a forest with no field in sight, I started to get no vibes. It may sound crazy, but there was a crow that had been in a tree chattering away on the rail trail. It had followed us off the trail, flying from tree to tree, and was squawking aggressively at us. You couldn't ignore it. Then my BlackBerry beeped that I had lost service. It fully occurred to me that maybe I was in a vulnerable position. This man was much larger than me, probably close to double my weight. We have been walking for about 30 minutes off trail now. I made up some lie about losing track of time and said I would have to head out. He tried to talk me into staying and how much fun my dog would have. He reached down to pet my dog. Doggo lunged in a very aggressive manner, snapping and snarling at the man. Doggo was a 95-pound boxer. The guy backed off and said, I quote, "I'll let you go this time. Maybe another day." We turned and hightailed it out of there so fast. The crow followed my dog and me all the way back to my car and didn't leave until I pulled away. I learned later that there is no field through the forest and no dog group that meets there. A few years later, a woman's car was found abandoned in the area, and she is still missing 10 years later. So this happened right before my, female, 20th birthday when I was in the US Navy. I was stationed at a Navy school in South Carolina for the entirety of my enlistment, close to Charleston but not actually in the city. It wasn't uncommon for people with cars to drive into the city, and everyone was friends with someone with a car. Me and my class leader, 22 male, Pete, were really close, and he was friends with this New Yorker, 19 male, that I didn't much like, but Tim had a car, so we ended up doing a lot together. One night, After all three of us had tanked an important test, I convinced them to go for ice cream. We decided on this little mom and pop type shop on the far side of Charleston and piled into Tim's truck. After we had gotten our ice cream, Pierre went to start giving Tim directions, but Tim insisted he knew a shortcut and we needed to just enjoy the ride. We didn't have anything early the next day, so I figured, F it, this'll probably be a funny story later when Tim gets us lost. So we're driving for at least twice as long as it would have taken to get back to base, but Tim keeps promising we're almost there. Meanwhile, we haven't seen a building in at least 10 miles, and the road is so dark that I feel like I'm looking into the abyss. Tim mentions that he has to pee, so Pete and I tell him to just pull over and take a leak. The road was lined with trees, so he had options to save his dignity, but he insists on pulling all the way off the road. So Tim finds a dirt road and turns down it, and Pete and I look at each other and both say he needs to stop. Pete and I are both from the South, while Tim grew up in mostly NYC, so Pete and I both knew how real shoot first, ask questions later can be. But Tim kept saying he was just going to go a little further through the trees. I'm thinking about how we're going to get shot because I wanted ice cream when we broke through the tree line. About 20 yards in front of us was a big bonfire that was bright compared to the light from the new moon. Immediately, my stomach dropped, and Pete and I both started screaming at Tim to turn around. That's when we noticed the figures around the fire and those closing in around us. Tim was frozen in the driver's seat, so I reached into the front and put the truck in reverse while hitting him repeatedly in the shoulder. Tim slowly turned around to check behind him to back up, only for him to freeze again. I turned and saw more figures closing around the trail behind us. Pete, by now, had pulled out a flashlight and was trying to blind the figures while repeatedly telling Tim to just go and that they'd move. So Tim starts to slowly make his way back while Pete's whipping his flashlight around and I'm making sure all the doors are locked, rolling up the rear windows, and closing the back sliding window. The crowd parted like we were Moses and they were the Red Sea, and we made it back onto the road without any other problems. We rode the rest of the ride in almost complete silence, and the three of us have never actually spoken about it since. The only thing that was said on the ride home was when Pete turned to me and said, "They didn't have faces." I have a couple creepy stories. First one. When I was about 5 years old, me and my twin sister saw a witch. Like no lie. We lived in a place called Mount Pleasant Mills, Pennsylvania. We lived in a small 3-bedroom trailer. Okay, so me and my sister are getting ready for bed. We turn off the lights, and when we go to turn off the light in the hall, that's when we hear some kind of laughter, so we both scurry into bed, put the covers over our heads, and stay silent. We finally get the courage to take them off, and we hear footsteps coming down the hall. Our bedroom didn't have a door, and our bed was really close to the hallway. Anyway, we hear someone coming, then all of a sudden they stop and stick their nose in between the doorway. That's when we went back under the covers, scared to death by what we saw. We hear footsteps coming towards the bed until it stops again. We feel someone standing over us, but we are too scared to check. It starts to breathe loudly while watching us. I guess me and my sister just close our eyes and eventually fall asleep. When we wake up, we tell our family what happened, and of course they don't believe a word we say and think we were just dreaming, but if that were true, we would have had the same exact dream. I brought it up to her a few years later, and she now semi-denies what she saw that night, so maybe it was just a dream. But that thing's nose was old, like with a wart and everything, it also had a hat on, and its skin looked to be slightly green. I'll never forget its creepy laugh. The next one is about 2 years later, so we're both about 7 years old now. And have moved since then. We are still living in Mount Pleasant Mills, Pennsylvania, but our house is way bigger and really old. Anyway, my twin woke me up out of a deep sleep by yelling my name. She said there was a woman sitting in a chair next to her bed. We had bunk beds, and I was on top. She told me to look down and see if I saw someone next to the bed. I said no, but she begged me to, so I peeked through the bars of my bed and saw what I thought was a woman. I was unsure because I was too scared to peek my head out the whole way, but she looked like she was staring at my sister. I told her quietly, and she started whining, asking me to look again to see her face. I said no while hiding under the covers, frightened that she might have a scary face. We eventually fell back to sleep, and our mom woke us up for breakfast. We didn't tell our family what we saw, we just discussed it with ourselves. Years later, we told one of our older sisters, and she said that she used to watch us sleep. We asked if that could have been her, and she said maybe, but if that were true, why wouldn't she have said anything? This last one was when I was 7-2 months later, though. My family was packing the house up to get ready to move, and everything was in boxes, so my twin and one of my older sisters slept on the couch floor and chair. I was the floor twin in the chair, and my sister was on the couch. It was about midnight when my twin woke me up in a whisper, saying a little girl about my age was sitting on top of her. I look to my right, and I see her just sitting there. My older sister was too scared to move, so we just stared at her, frozen with fear. She was white, she had short black hair, and she was wearing a dark green dress. She didn't look scary at all. It was definitely creepy, though. We all eventually fell back asleep. I was alone at home. I was 14 years old, and my parents were with my brother at the doctor. I managed to fall asleep, although I was very scared. Later that night, I woke up because I heard something. I was lying there, afraid that someone was in the room. After 5 minutes, I calmed down, nothing happened. As I wanted to sleep again, I heard it again. It was like a scratch on the door, like someone tried to open my door. I hoped it was my mother or father who returned home. Then, after a long pause, I hear the door opening. I turned my face to the wall and tried to hide under the blanket. I could hear some steps, something or someone was walking slowly towards me. I was so scared, I even pissed myself a bit. Since I was sleeping in a double bed, mostly above my brother, I was at a height of 1.70 meters, so I was always at the same level as the head of my mother or another adult when they came in, so after I couldn't hear the steps anymore, I turned around to see what or who was there, still covered under the blanket. I slowly began to lift the blanket so I could see, and there it was. A silhouette, head and shoulders, just standing there and watching me. I covered myself again and turned to the wall again, almost crying. After a while, I thought that the thing was gone. But then I felt something. Something touched my head, trying to pull the blanket off of me. I started crying and couldn't move. The blanket was not covering me anymore. I soon started hearing breathing and even felt it on my neck. That thing was right above me. I kept my eyes closed, hoping for my family to come home and save me. Then I heard it, the voice that still haunts me in my nightmares. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. With a demonic deep voice that scared the living shit out of me. At that moment, I turned around, opened my eyes, and saw that thing right above me, somehow floating, just staring at me, but with no face, just darkness. At that moment, I woke up screaming and realized that I was still alone at home. I ran out of the apartment, went to my neighbor, and cried for 20 minutes. I couldn't sleep for a week after dreaming that, in fear that I would meet the thing again. When I was 7 or 8, in the middle of the summer, I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought it was because I was cold, which was uncomfortably odd because it was summer and my bedroom is upstairs and insulated. I moved my curtain aside to see if the window was open, but it was closed tight. While I was looking out the window, I noticed a man standing in the street. The street lamp was on his back, so I couldn't see his face, but he was looking towards our house. What I noticed was that he was very tall. I think now he was probably about 6-7 inches. It scared the crap out of me, so I pulled the curtain over the window and used the tacks from one of my posters to tack the curtain down since the window didn't lock. I covered my head with my covers because I knew that my dad would say it was a nightmare and give me a hug before sending me back to bed. I eventually fell back asleep. A few hours later, I woke up again. It was still very dark out, probably around 1 a.m. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom door was open. And I always shut my bedroom door because I'm a very private person. I got out of bed and went to go to the bathroom. I made sure, as I was leaving the bedroom, to close my door. Once I was done, as I was going up the stairs, I noticed my door was open. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I went into my room, and my heart dropped into my stomach. My bed covers were torn off, and the sheets were strewn across the floor. All my pictures and posters were taken off the walls, and my dresser was emptied onto my bed. I went into my sister's room because it was right across the hall. I felt even worse when I did this because she was fast asleep and all the papers had been pulled out of her desk. I woke her up, shaking her as hard as I could. I told her what had happened, and we both ran downstairs to my dad's room. He helped us search the house, but we didn't find anything. Nothing had been taken, and me and my sister's rooms were the only ones that had been trashed. We both slept in the living room for a few days because it was by my dad's room, but nothing happened, so we went back to normal and eventually forgot about it until now. So a few years ago, maybe 3 to 4, I went on a camping trip with my family and some other close family friends. There were 10 kids, but 3 were toddlers, so the rest of us went out into the woods at night. We decided to go up a trail we normally go up, where we climbed a crap ton of rocks before getting to the top and continuing. So, we get farther into the woods, and all of a sudden we hear a loud bang that later my parents said they heard. Then we heard 2 men speak about how they almost hit something. We got the frick out of there. One of us nearly slipped on the rocks, and I tripped on a root. We got back to the campsite and told our parents, but they said that they were probably hunters. It was really freaking creepy in the moment. Before I start off this story, I want to address the fact that I had just turned 12 when this event took place. I am going on 17 now. Also, I am a girl. My house has an old, rickety basement, but it makes up for it by having a surprisingly nice den. That is where we were going to be sleeping, my friend, who came for the night. Being young and dumb, we decided to stay up until midnight. I know it isn't that late, but at the time, it seemed like an all-nighter. The girls all asked me what we were going to do because we were all bored. I decided to bring out an old Ouija board that I had purchased at a yard sale. This is where the story starts getting strange. No one could get the board to work except one specific girl. We'll call her Sarah. I wanted to keep playing and see if it would work, so I jumped in. When the piece started moving, I thought she was messing with me, but her face turned white when she saw the name it spelled out, Charles. She had recently lost an uncle by that name, and the spirit seemed to be the same person. She was quick to put away the board and completely neglected saying goodbye. After all of this went on, we decided not to sleep in the basement and just built a fort upstairs. Not much sleep was had, but in the morning, Sarah was not in the fort we built. I looked everywhere and finally found her in the basement. This part is what gives me nightmares. When I found her, she was in the den, just standing there with her hands around her neck, choking herself to the point that her face was turning purple. Her mouth was gaping, her eyes wide and bloodshot, and she felt like she had no control over her actions. Gasping for air, she was nearly lifeless. I finally got her calmed down, or so I thought. After 5 seconds of silence, she screamed and then fell to the floor. Shortly after, she awoke and apologized. It just didn't seem like her. She acted like a zombie. In her zombie-like state, she went upstairs and sat next to my mom, who was patiently waiting on the other girl's parents. Sarah promptly, in the sweetest tone she could manage, asked my mom for a rope to hang herself from our rafters. Sarah has since gone to therapy and is now much better. When I was a kid, I was sleeping in my bedroom, and, the way I experienced it, I woke up to find a very tall creature standing in my room, looking at me with enormous black and white eyes. As I looked into its eyes, I was overcome with the feeling that I had experienced this creature before and that everything was going to be alright. Then I looked down, my sheets were covered in blood, and my arm was ripped open. I say ripped because there were strands of skin still connecting the huge gash on my arm. I started screaming and flailing around, but I couldn't hear myself scream. There was no sound in the room. It was like somehow the creature had created a bubble that sound couldn't pass through. I looked up again at it, and it looked at me with those eyes, and I knew I would be fine. I fell back asleep and woke up the next morning with my sheets messed up way more than normal and my arm hurting like hell. I don't have any history with night terrors or anything like that, but my parents told me it was just a dream. I couldn't even be in my room alone without a huge knife under my pillow and several more next to my bed. A few weeks or maybe a month later, I was starting to get over it, and my science class was watching a documentary on alien abductions to show how ridiculous they were and how you have to prove science. One of the people being interviewed described the creature I saw exactly, not just a similar one but exactly the kind I saw, and had almost the exact same story, but he was driving and it was in the middle of the road. The same thing happened, he stopped and got out of his car. He said he started trying to ask it questions but couldn't hear a thing. Then he said that when he looked into its huge eyes, he felt like he had seen it before and that everything was going to be alright. Still worries me sometimes. I used to walk home from nights out quite often. It was about an hour's walk, but I could shave 10 minutes off the end of it by cutting through the woods. One night, about 3 a.m., I was walking through pitch black, and my only point of reference was a street light by the exit at the top of a hill. Luckily, I know my way around by heart. Anyway, I'm walking through and I hear a noise. I assume it was from one of the houses in the distance, but I heard it again, much closer this time, and it was musical. I continued walking anyway and heard it a third time, right beside me. Startled, I spin around and spot a man crouched in a bush with a flute. So the terrified 17-year-old that I was pretended not to notice and walked briskly towards the exit. Now for the scary part. A week later, I had all but forgotten about the Pied Piper of the woods. I'm walking through again, and I make it to the hill towards the exit. I see the streetlight lighting up the hill, and I see the silhouette of a man sitting down. His head rises, and he sat staring at me for what feels like hours. I'm frozen on the spot. This was the only way out besides the way I came in. What do I do? That question was short-lived as he jumped to his feet, screamed a real blood-curdling, animal-like scream, and sprinted towards me. I have never run so fast in my life. I fled with all my strength back out the way I came and hid behind a car on the main road. I was picked up by police, who thought I was trying to break into the car. I reported the man in the woods, but I don't know if anything came of it. I still haven't returned to those woods. In 2017, me and my friend Ethan went to an abandoned place that used to be an asylum. We like to explore abandoned places. It was in Epsom, Surrey, England, if you want to see for yourself. Because I was staying at his house, we could stay out late as his parents weren't strict at all. We walked for about an hour and arrived at the place. It was big, scary, and ripe for exploration, so we did. We went all throughout the building through dark, run-down corridors. Near the right side of the asylum is a collapsed part jutting from the main building, which has a little bit you could crawl through to get into a wine cellar. It was pitch black inside and pretty big. We weren't making much noise because we were kind of shaken about the whole abandoned wine cellar. We were looking through with our phone torches. It was just a big stone room with nothing but rubble and black bags, and it stank really bad, so we left. Going outside, we went out to the front of the building and heard a rustle coming from the roof and a light flash. Because it was well known, we assumed someone was just chilling on the roof, but instead it was a fire, which pretty much destroyed the whole building when we went back. The only thing that scared me is that the fire started when we were in the cellar, and someone must have been hiding from us because we didn't see, hear, or know of anyone being nearby. I've always thought that he was trying to kill us. The oldest of my 3 sisters had 3 Victorian-looking porcelain dolls from one of her family members. Any time I would be in her room, it was always freezing, and just looking at the dolls gave me the heebie-jeebies. My sister moved out of the room and went off to college. She didn't want the dolls to get damaged, so she left them in the bedroom. I didn't know this, so I moved into that room. At the time this happened, I was in 6th grade, and that's when my school district opened band up as a class. I decided I wanted to play trombone, and so I did. I always had the instrument in its case against a wall. The entire thing in its case weighed about 10 pounds. A few nights after I moved into the room, one of the dolls shifted. It was the creepiest one. She had dark hair and a dark red dress. When she leaned to the side, my trombone fell over. Even though it was about 3 in the morning and I was scared out of my mind, I got out of bed, picked my trombone back up, and went back to bed. The next night, the same thing happened, but this time the trombone was pushed 5 feet into the middle of my room. After it stopped, my fan that I always had on a low setting just stopped, and almost right after that, all of the papers and homework on my desk flew off. I was scared shitless, but I picked my bedroom up and went back to bed. The next night and every night after that, I would wake up at about 4 in the morning to some invisible force sitting on the side of my bed and stroking my hair. My door was always closed so that my cats couldn't get in, and there's no way my fan could have caused this. I was constantly trying to debunk it. Then we moved the dolls to the basement. We had an Xbox in the basement, and whenever I would game with my friends, I'd always feel like I was being watched. Then it started playing with my hair. I even had a friend over, and she got grabbed. We have since moved, and I have no idea where the dolls ended up, but I'm sure as hell glad that they're not where I live anymore. My boyfriend grew up in a small town. He lived in a small gated community, and he was at the end of the street. Next to his house was a forest. One night he woke up, took his blanket and pillow to the couch, and turned on the TV. He then fell asleep. In his own words, he described what followed as an out-of-body experience, similar to a lucid dream. His consciousness seemed detached from his physical form, as if observing himself from a surreal vantage point. There he was, fixated on the television screen, which emitted nothing but a static haze. No TV show, no movie, just static. Strangely enough, he found himself transfixed. He then woke up, felt a wash of fear, and quickly walked down the hallway to get to his bedroom. At the end of the hall, outside his bedroom, was a window. He looked out the window and saw a woman looking back at him, standing at the edge of the forest. I asked him what she looked like. He says she was tall, had black hair, and was dressed in white. He said her mouth was hanging open. They stared at each other for a bit before he ran into his room. He fell back asleep, and in the morning, he assumed it was all a dream. Until he walked out of his room and saw his pillow and blanket in the same position on the couch and the static channel on. Man, that gave me the chills. This happened to me. 3 days ago, I was on a small vacation with my grandparents. We rented an Airbnb in McGregor, Iowa. All was good, but I was worn out from the activities and traveling we did. So when we got to the Airbnb, I found a bed and fell asleep in it. I woke up in the middle of the night and didn't see anything, so I adjusted myself into a more comfortable position and fell asleep. Moments later, I felt this huge sense of dread and extreme fright. My arms felt like they were being poked by thousands of sharp needles, and my lips felt like they had no blood in them. As I opened my eyes, I saw this figure in front of the blinds across from my bed. It was a shadow, no head, only the neck down. My horror only intensified. I could barely bring myself to pull the blankets over myself and fall back asleep. I woke up at 5 a.m. and went down the stairs to think on what I saw. A little later, my grandma came down. I told her what happened. She didn't seem too worried. I told my grandpa as well. He thought it was cool. But still scared the living duck out of me. One summer, when I was 14 years old, I was waiting for a package and would often go check the mail. I live on a street that gives an opening to the park, and the mailbox was just next to it. I would always pass through it to go check it, so one time it was starting to get dark and I noticed I didn't go that day and decided would go right now. I told my dad, and he said fine. So I was walking to that opening, and when you get there, you can choose which way to go because there is a part with the soccer field or the playground. I passed by the soccer field because it was closer to the mail. But as I was walking, I noticed that where the small ice rink was, there was a girl sitting on her knees facing the wall. At first, I thought she was sitting on her boyfriend, making out, because she was really close to the wall, but as I got closer, I realized she was alone. It freaked me out because she did not say anything and was not moving. All I could see was her long black hair. If she turned around, she would see me, and if I was terrorized, she would. So I looked at her the whole time she was walking, and she never moved. To go back, I chose the other way. Nothing happened, but it was really scary, and I wanted to tell someone about it. My mom works at a college as a janitor. She has the midnight shift, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. Each janitor works at a designated building and is alone most of the night. The building my mom starts at is a factory-type building. The exterior part of the door has no handle and is impossible to open without a key. My mom drives a little truck to go from building to building. One day, as she was exiting her building, she closed the door and came upon something horrifying. It was a man without a shirt, covered in tattoos, about 10 feet away from her. My mom describes him as looking almost like a gangster. All of a sudden, he starts hopping like a kangaroo towards my mom. At that moment, my mom froze in panic, not knowing what to do. Since the door behind her was closed, she had no way of quickly going back into the building since she'd have to unlock the door. My mom is very religious, and her first instinct was to start saying a prayer as this man hopped towards her. Now, my mom said this prayer silently, and she says the man stopped and started walking backwards away from her. She then got into her little truck and did a 3-point turn to head to her other building. When she looked again, the man was gone, nowhere to be seen. Now, it's not uncommon for my mom to stumble upon strange activity at her job. She's had doors shut on her and toilets flushed, and she even saw a man with glowing red horns on her way to work before. But she says this is by far the most terrifying incident she's experienced. Who or what could have been the person to scare my mom? This was in the summer or near fall of 2022, when I was 19 and my dad took a trip to Oregon for a camping trip and a memorial to my godfather. So, from Denver to Oregon, my dad and I flew and stayed at my aunt's for a few days before making the trip up to Lewis and Clark Park in Washington, close to Oregon. We met up with another group of my family from Maui and Idaho. I remember the drive up. It was through a bright green, thick forest that made me nervous being so far from anything, but I guess that's the charm too. I hadn't gone camping for a long time, so after helping put up the tent and having a good meal, I asked my dad for a White Claw, which he granted. I only had one, though. After a while, I felt good and chaotic, so after dancing with my younger cousins, it got dark, and me and one of my closer cousins, 14, went off into the forest to summon demons. I don't actually believe in demons, and I didn't think it would work. It was just to be scary and rebellious. So we sat down in a small clearing near a path where my cousin took a Bath and Body Works candle, lit it, and put it between us. I began mystically waving my hands over it and spouting gibberish, which I reckon was similar to chanting. We had a good laugh, then moved on and went back to the site. Later in the night, when everyone else went to sleep, me and my cousin decided to summon demons, but be more real this time. I looked up a demon summoning spell that had a good-looking Latin chant, and even though we had none of the materials except the candle and a hot dog bun to sacrifice, we still spoke it and burned the hot dog bun, but after nothing happened, we shrugged it off and just went on talking. We talked about anything and everything for hours until I started feeling really bad. I can't really explain it well. It's like anxiety, the kind where it feels like a weight is in your stomach and it's harder to breathe. I felt like we were being watched, which was fair since we were surrounded by dark, dense forests. I began flashing my light around, not exactly looking, but looking to make sure something wasn't there. My cousin picked up on my fear and looked around too, and now we had two beams of light pointed into the forest. I began to feel a little better, as there was nothing immediate until I pointed my flash up. That's when I saw it. A creature. Pale white maber gray with dark void-like eyes staring at us perched like a monkey on a high branch in a spruce tree. I froze. I went through everything in my mind. Was this because we summoned demons? We didn't even do it right. Was this some kind of animal? It can't be, it looks too humanoid. It looks exactly like those skinwalker pictures you can find on creepy forums, but it was right there in front of me. Was I hallucinating? Again, I have been known to hallucinate, but I never had before so vividly. Then I remembered my cousin. If they saw it, then it was definitely real, and I'm not hallucinating, so I told my cousin to look up where my flashlight was pointing. They froze, too. Do you see that? I asked. I can't remember exactly what my cousin said, but it was something like, "What is that?" Or "It looks like a demon." Still, I needed more proof that they were seeing the same thing. "What color is it?" I asked. "White," they said. That was more than enough for me. We began to rush away, taking the candle and running to the area where the tents were. I would look behind me and see the figure now standing tall, at least 5 feet tall. It was tall and skinny. Every time I looked back, it would seem to stop, but when I would look again, it would be standing closer, making its way to us. My group and her group set up tents on different paths on the campground, far enough away that I felt like we could make it if we ran and didn't look back. I stopped my cousin where our paths diverged and told her to run straight to her tent before counting down. 1, 2, 3. I said, and I ran to my tent and didn't look back. I made it to my tent and accidentally woke my father, who said, "What were you guys doing? You were keeping the whole camp up." But I didn't want to elaborate. "I'll tell you in the morning," I said, climbing into my sleeping bag. Then and there, I felt okay. I was now surrounded by family, and surely nothing would get me with them around. I texted my cousin to make sure they got back all right, and they did, so I settled in for the night, but I didn't get right to sleep. My uncle scared me a bit when he went up to go to the bathroom, and for the whole night I kept hearing this noise right outside my tent. It was like a small animal was digging and fumbling around, and whenever I would move, it would go away. It was right near my head, and it was scaring the shite out of me, but I eventually got to sleep when it mostly stopped. I woke up the next morning and almost immediately headed back to the fire pit, where my cousin and I were when we saw the figure. It was bright out, so I figured I could look in the space I saw it in and figure out if it really had been an animal or maybe some kind of bird nest, but I saw nothing like that. In fact, what I saw was almost a clearing on the exact branch it was on, like something big had been there. When my cousin woke, we confirmed we saw the same thing in the same spot. I'm a really heavy sleeper, and I never wake during the night. However, a couple of years ago, I was sound asleep in bed with my other half when I woke up for no apparent reason. You know when you wake up and are instantly awake? That bothered me because it wasn't like I had heard a noise or anything. It was about 3 a.m., and I noticed light coming in under my bedroom door, which instantly freaked me out as I'm analytic about switching everything off at night. I sat up, and only then did I realize there was a guy standing at the end of my bed staring at me. He started asking me where Laura was. I have no idea who Laura is, and it was obvious the guy was off his head. My primal instinct kicked in, and I roared at him, "What the duck are you doing in my house?" Which promptly woke my wife, who proceeded to scream the house down. I jumped out of bed, speared the guy, and put a rather large hole in our bedroom wall. I then dragged him out of the room while the missus frantically called the cops. As I dragged him towards the front door, he was making a bit of a racket at this stage. His mate, who must have been keeping watch, tried to push through, and I ended up holding the intruder on the ground while keeping the front door shut with my leg. Amazingly, the cops turned up within 3 or 4 minutes and stormed the place. It turns out the dude was a crackhead. He got arrested along with his friend, and I suffered from panic attacks at night for about 2 years afterwards. I've never been more terrified in my life. So I used to live in a small town in rural Canada. There was this old folks' home for the mentally ill that was closed a long time before I moved there. During the day, people would go on the property and hang out in the well-kept grass and trees. The actual building was locked up, but teenagers would break into it to basically scare themselves, myself included on a few occasions. One night, me and my best friend, who is a serious skeptic, decided to break into a part of the building we knew hadn't been gotten into by anyone. To get an idea of what it looks like, it is 5 stories tall, with the 4th and 5th stories making a slight tower jutting out from the middle. Old brick in the front and modern cement blocks that were painted over, like in schools, at the back, where you could tell stuff was added in later years. The newer parts of the building had been broken into a lot by kids, but the main building had thick metal doors, and the windows that might be able to be opened were on the third story. It looked like an old school, church, or asylum all got cobbled together. We climbed on the roof of the boiler room at the back of the building by piling up furniture debris we found in one of the ransacked storage buildings behind the main building. We pulled off one of the plywood covers nailed over a hole in the roof, for a skylight or a missing vent, not sure, that led into the boiler room, and used the pipes along the ceiling and walls to climb down. This part of the building still looked semi-modern, and you could tell it was added closer to when it was closed. There was an exit that only opened from the inside, so at least leaving would be easy if needed. Me and my buddy are pumped at this point. The pipes made it easy to get down, and everything was going as well as it could. We make our way to the back of the room and find the door leading to the untouched main floor of the building. We're half expecting the door to be locked like all other metal ones, but I open with an atchy, loud against the silence, creak. The door opened into the middle of a hallway leading left or right. The first thing we noticed was dust. Everywhere. It left a 1/4-inch film on everything. We both went right, as it led into an interesting looking main area with sheet covered furniture. All of a sudden, I feel sick. Not throw up sick, but I'm going to die sick. Like my brother said, run. Leave. Escape. Now. I started shaking for no reason. It was so jarring. If I had to compare it to something, it felt like someone was right behind me with the intent to end me. It was weird because of how sudden it was, like a switch went off. I was excited and positive right up until the point where I was convinced we were about to get jumped on or murdered. I looked at my buddy, and his face had the same expression as what I felt. Genuinely terrified. White as a ghost. I think that might have scared me even more, honestly, because I've never seen him like that. Remember, neither of us saw anything at this point. No ghosts, no distinct noises after the door creaks, no creepy dolls or skeletons, just thick dust and sheet-covered furniture. It made no sense that I felt so threatened, and looking at my friend, I knew he felt it too. Without saying a word to each other, we turn on our heels and walk towards the boiler room. We didn't tell each other that either of us wanted to go, we just started backtracking faster than we came in. I'm leading us at this point, and my blood ran ice cold when I noticed something on the other side of the door we left open. A set of fresh-looking footprints that led down the left route of the hall. We both went right to get the large main room. The images were definitely not ours. As we got closer, it got worse. Those footprints started 8 to 10 feet from the door. In the middle of the hall. It looked like a person teleported 10 feet from the door mid-stride and walked the opposite way and around the corner. We booked out of there as fast as possible. Thank duck there was an exit in the boiler room, because I can't imagine climbing up those pipes in that panic. I literally never went back to that building. I asked my buddy what he saw on the way back to his house, and he said he saw the prints and noticed how far they were from the door, so I know I wasn't seeing things. I'm an atheist. I don't have a good explanation for this. Bonus fact, the tower had a window at the top, and some people claimed that they could see someone standing in it at night sometimes. There were a couple times when I swear something looked like it could be in the window, before this whole incident happened, but it could easily just be my mind playing tricks. So to start off, I was smaller at the time and not too strong, but I still thought I was a good runner. At this point, I always went with my friends at 6:45 and came back around 8 or 9 to do my own thing, but during the fall and winter, it was way darker than in the summer. It was fall, so the roads were still clear to use my electric scooter to get home. It's faster than maybe a 5 to 10 minute walk with headphones. It was around maybe 8:45, somewhere between 8 and 9, when I started to roll my way home. I was maybe halfway there when I was on a path that goes behind houses and just to the side of a school and some trees. A lot of the walking paths were completely pitch black, and the only thing that kept me from falling flat on my face was the knowledge of where the ditches were because I go on walks often. Just at the end of the path, before you find the light of the street again in front of the school, there is the darkest part with a massive ditch to the left, which is hollow except for some trees and bushes covering it on the rim, and a smaller ditch to the right. AKA a perfect, invisible, and easy spot to hide from anyone without very strong light. I had just made it onto the street when I started hearing an echo of footsteps that made it sound like 2 pairs of feet. I rationalized it as me slapping my foot too hard on the concrete whenever I pushed. But I didn't push too often, and the footsteps didn't match sometimes. So I slowed down and waited a step, barely moving to listen, a stupid move, and I didn't hear a sound. A rush of relief hits me, and I continue, but they start up again. During this time, I didn't dare look back, so I sped up, and a few seconds later they did too. You might be thinking, how could they keep up if it was an electric scooter? But it was not very strong, and all it really did was give me less work to do, but it was easy to catch up with if I wasn't using my life force to make it go faster. I was going decently fast, making sure not to look back or give any indication that I knew, and going at a fairly normal but fast speed. I was so close to home and thinking for maybe a minute, this is ridiculous, you're just overreacting about an echo and you're acting like a 9 years old. And that's when I turned onto my street feeling a bit better, and the most ear-crushing tweet or whistle sound came from behind me to my right, and I looked for a second to see something, but I didn't care to die looking, so I booked it, not making a sound, rushing and almost destroying my shoes to make it home, and I heard nothing except my own feet hitting the ground, and luckily the garage was open and I rushed inside and closed the garage, the lights still on, looking out to see anyone. I never saw the person and was scared to death for the rest of the evening and week. Whenever I went over there I never took that route again, and once after someone accompanied me home. Some people say it was my imagination, but even if so, where the hell did the whistle behind me come from? Driving one moonless night on a hilly, winding road with no street lights that I had never driven on before, I was alone on the road, and I noted that there were no intersecting roads along the way. Then, suddenly, someone was driving behind me with his high beams on and tailgating me. I wondered where he came from, as I hadn't noticed anyone anywhere behind me. The car followed me, and I got a bit anxious because I had no idea where he could have come from, and he was tailgating me with his high beams on. I finally came to the end of that road, where it met another road perpendicular to it. I drove to the other side of that new road and parked on the shoulder to see who was tailgating me. But no one was there. I couldn't understand that because, as I mentioned, there were no intersecting roads or driveways that he could have turned into. So where did he go?